Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Dan Riechers from the Division of Research Commercialization and Outreach. I work in the Office of Research Development and Commercialization there. Today we're going to talk about grant writing, but also the process of preparing to be successful at getting your research funded. I'll provide you first with a brief overview of just the division, and then we'll talk about our agenda. So the Division of Research Commercialization and Outreach, RCO we call it, has research development and commercialization. Research administration, those folks sort of manage all the grants and handle filing, reports, and that sort of thing with the funders. Research compliance, make sure that all of your research complies with federal regulations for the protection of human subjects, animals, biosafety, those sorts of things. We also have the Office of Community Outreach. They engage with the community and offer some professional development in the evenings for professionals, help researchers connect to the K-12 system, stuff like that. We also have the Lone Star Center, the UAS Center. It's the drone center, so if you read stories about people flying drones for research purposes or with corporations, that's the team that does that. And then the National Spill Control School, that they train professionals and students how to deal with spills of various substances, whether it's oil, fuel, or other things. So that's the division as a whole. We do a bunch of things, and I'm going to go through this really quickly. But essentially, we support high-impact learning practices where we can. A lot of students get engaged in research, and that sometimes comes from money that we help people acquire. A lot of times faculty don't use our services, but sometimes they do. We support knowledge creation across all the disciplines, including peer-reviewed publication that helps increase the prominence of our institution. We facilitate outreach activities and also support commercialization as well. So that's those are some of our goals. If you need to find us, the main RCO office is in Faculty Center behind Starbucks, behind the graduate studies, essentially. It's a little bit confusing to find us, but we are there. The Office of Community Outreach is across campus at the Natural Resources Center, building number 2. Today we're going to talk about how to prepare to be successful at finding funding for your work, how to find funders. We'll talk about grant writing, just some real basics, and then we'll talk about some funding opportunities within TAMU CC itself. The research office provides some money, and I think that grad studies does as well. If at any point you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. If you want to chime in and add something, feel free to do that. I'm pretty casual in terms of presentation. So, all right, so people, especially graduate students, often don't really know where to start, right? Some of you may have applied for scholarships, fellowships, other means of support. So you've got some practice at writing proposals. Once you start to progress through your graduate school career, you want to sort of ramp that up. And if you can, become a team member on a proposal with one of your faculty members. Sometimes there are opportunities for you to apply for small amounts of funding to support work yourself as a grad student, especially in fields where you need like lab supplies or like you need to actually really buy things. A lot of times people's work can just be done with time, right? So you don't always have to have support for that. But really a key thing to do is look at how others in your field have funded their work, and then also look at career planning. We're going to take a look at an example, if we can find the internet or proxy server. It's not looking good here. All right. Her website where she describes the NSF, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the G.R.O.W. Super prestigious, super hard to win, but it is winnable. Someone from here, I think, won one last year. And if you're going to try to win it, then going to a page like hers where she talks about her process and how she was successful and how she strategized to win that fellowship is a really useful thing to do if you're going to apply. So keep that in mind. You can also look at her CV, her curriculum vitae, her resume, and she lists a few grants that she's won in the past that have supported her work, right? So I would say in your fields, you probably know who the prominent researchers are or where the prominent schools or research centers are in your fields. Go there and look for postdocs or researchers and look at their CVs and see who's given them support, right? Looking at that list will tell you who's funding the kind of work that it is that you want to do. So that's one thing I always recommend. I think we're still disconnected.
links to find a table.
All right, and we've got a list of links that are going to be emailed to all the attendees as long as you sign in. I think there's a sign-in sheet. So essentially what I'm advocating is that you stalk your peers and those people who've been successful in your field ahead of you and learn from the things that they've done, right? A lot of that's public knowledge. Make use of it. I also think it's really important to plan your career as well, and there's a link to a career planning site that'll take you through just some basic steps you can do to think about what it is you're doing. Most of you are in fields that have been well established, and there are really clear paths to get from point A to point B. If you want a faculty job when you finish, there's a path, there's a set of things you should do. You should be going to conferences, you should publish, you should write proposals, etc. You should build a network. If you want to go into industry, there are similar but different things you'll do to prepare yourself for an industry career, right? So just be aware of those things. Your faculty can help you think about what your options are and how best to go about them. So go about achieving them. I'm just going to hit F5 so we can carry on. And so as grad students, think about working for a researcher who you view as a role model, someone who's been successful. If you get a chance to join a research team, do that. And use your limited resources strategically to advance your goals. I know a lot of times you have to take a student job to help pay the bills. It may not directly align with your research or your work, and that's okay. But ideally, if you can get into a position where you can earn a little money or offset your tuition and still gain that research experience, you should definitely do it. So as you progress through grad school, you should start to develop some ideas about areas where you're going to make an intervention in your field, right? So you are reading all the scholarship and let's say narrative inquiry. And you think no one's done X with narrative inquiry yet, which is a method in the social sciences. What you should do, what I recommend, is that you write a concise one-page description of what your idea is, situated in the existing literature, and state why it matters. The process of writing it down, we have a lot of ideas in our heads that sound really good, right? But the process of writing it down forces you to make it concrete, and it forces you to use like real specific terms to define it. And that often helps you understand if the idea is worth continuing to pursue or if it's not quite ready to pursue yet. And maybe it's still developing. Once you've got that written down, you can share it with colleagues, your mentors, fellow grad students. You can share it with a research officer such as myself. And the idea is that you want your idea to be understandable by experts in your field, but also by educated lay people. Sometimes people say that your grandmother should be able to read it, and I think it depends on how far your grandmother made it in school, whether she should be used as your benchmark. So no offense to grandmothers, but I think generally for grant writing, you really want someone who's college educated to be able to understand your idea. They don't need to be an expert in biomedicine or recombinant DNA in order to understand what your one-pager is going to say necessarily. So keep that in mind. When you submit to agencies for funding, reviewers are often not all experts in your field. They could be from adjacent fields, and they'll probably be familiar with your methods, but maybe not all your specific terms. So keep that in mind. So I really advocate writing. Writing is a big part of many professionals' jobs. And I know a lot of academics write every day, or try to at least, because it's the thing. So that's part of preparing, so of course, to have a network. I had an advisor in my program tell me that it's great. We know that networking is one of the best things you can do to help yourself get a job. So just go do that. And I'm like, well, what if you're an introvert? Then what do you do? What if you really can't stand going to conferences, having to talk to all those humans? She didn't have a good answer for me. So I guess we introverts have to just get over it and press on. But basically, that's sort of the background. Really, when it comes to finding funders, we're going to get to searching in a second, but I just want to come back to looking at colleagues' CVs, checking the acknowledgments pages in publications and books. And if there's like a research center that's focused on your specific area, go to that research center site and see who funded them and who they get funding from. The Hart Research Center on our campus was funded by an endowment from Ed Hart and his family. But you can look and see that they continue to get funding from the National Science Foundation, NOAA, all these big federal agencies, as well as some private foundations. So if you're into marine science, you could look at what Hart's up to and figure that out. In business, I think a lot of times people do consulting work in local communities, and they network with the local business community, maybe through the Chamber of Commerce or through other ways, and they find ways to bring in revenue to support their work through those means. So it just depends on the kind of activities that you're doing to make knowledge. So the most basic advice I give everyone is to use a search engine. If you come to me and say, I can't find any funding, the first thing I'm going to do is put in grant funding, in quotation marks, the word and then in quotation marks, I'm going to put the short phrase or word that best describes what it is you do. So you can do that yourself at home with your shoes off and a glass of wine in your hand if you want. But that's the most basic level. Another thing you should all do is go to grants.gov, and you can, it's the second from the right selection in their top menu bar. I think it's Connect. If you click on that, you can actually do a search at grants.gov for funding opportunities from the federal government, and then you can save that search and you can get emails whenever anything from that search comes up new. Okay? Federal law requires all federal funding opportunities to be posted at grants.gov. That includes collaborative agreements, contracts, awards for research, all that stuff is there. So it's really your one-stop for anything federal. I would show you grants.gov, but I don't think we'd have time. And of course, we don't have the internet right now. So we're going to press on. Duke University has a free database. They pull funding sources out of this tool called Pivot, I believe, and they post them up with a 1-week delay. Pivot's a really expensive tool. We don't have access to it here. A lot of big institutions do. But Duke is kind enough to offer a free database that you can search. You'll get a lot of overlap with grants.gov because federal opportunities are in that database, but you'll also find nonprofits and foundations that might support the work that you do. Finally, there's a group called Foundation Center. They aggregate all the information from foundations, or as much as they can anyway, and you can buy a subscription to their website. But what you can do for free is you can go in and look at IRS Form 990s. The Form 990 is required to be filed by all nonprofits with the IRS, and it lists everyone that gave them money and everyone they gave money to. So let's say that you want to apply to the Coastal Bend Community Foundation in Corpus Christi for some money to help your animal shelter. I taught grant writing this past spring, grant writing for nonprofits, and that was one of the things that one of my students did. But what you can do is go in and you can find the 990 for the Coastal Bend Community Foundation, and you'll see all the grants that they made, and usually it lists the amount, the number of dollars that they provided to the person asking for the money, the awardee. So you can use that to do research to learn what sort of organizations they give money to, how much money they give, because a lot of times they won't tell you, but if you look and almost everything they give is less than $10,000, if you need $100,000, they're probably not the right funder for you, right? So you can use that to think about fit and whether or not this donor is going to be a good fit for the project that you need to have funded. We're going to talk a little bit more about your idea and thinking about those issues, but grants.gov, Foundation Center are two biggies. There's also a Texas grants website, Texas eGrants I think it's called. I didn't include a link to it. I can add that and have it sent out to all of you. But it lists all of the grants that come from Texas. A lot of those are contracts for services, but they do have some grants just for to support research and other things. There are two. There's Humanities Texas and Texas Endowment for the Arts. There's an Arts Council for Texas as well. The Humanities one gets its money from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the NEH. The Arts one gets its money from the National Arts Foundation. I can't remember the name of it. But sorry? NEA. The NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, yes, of course. That money's a pass-through. It comes from the feds, it goes to the state, and the state passes it on competitively to people all throughout the entire state of Texas. So keep an eye out for those as well. Those are often smaller grants, whereas the national organizations will make larger grants. It's not always true, but if you really have a hard time finding funding opportunities, meet with faculty in your department and ask them for any advice that they might give you. I would say do a little bit of your own homework first, though, before you do that. So you go in looking like you know sort of the background in your field, and then see what sort of advice they can provide, right? So, any questions up to this point? There are also myriad web pages out there of research offices and other entities that will post lists of links to places where you can look for funding. So Just do some digging around on the web and you'll find a lot more. One thing that's really important to consider once you've found a funder is to think about their objectives. People give money for different reasons, right? Sometimes it's philanthropy, just the desire to do good in the world. Knowledge creation is a big one for a lot of the federal agencies like the National Science Foundation. They expect you to make some new knowledge and then report that back to your community of scholars and use that to advance human knowledge and understanding, right? Sometimes the funder wants to see services provided. So the group this last spring in my class wrote a group proposal for the Coastal Bend Food Bank, and they got $5,000 to help support some initiatives that the food bank were doing. So right, they're providing services to the community, helping underserved, underprivileged people. Sometimes it's about training and education. EPA has some grants that are all about training people to recycle and make better use of the environment, to not pollute, that sort of thing. There's a great video on YouTube called All the Cups from Corpus Christi. It was a video taken right after the rain of a storm drain that flows into Corpus Christi Bay down by Cole Park, and there's an endless stream of styrofoam stripes cups basically coming out and going into our bay. If you ever get a chance, watch that video. It's crazy. The translation of knowledge, sometimes, there are like basic researchers making knowledge in laboratories. Sometimes funders will pay for that knowledge to be translated to people in the community. So someone may do a study that shows the harmful effects of some chemical. Then there may be money to provide support for people to go out and communicate to people who used to use or still do use that chemical, to talk to them about how to protect themselves from getting harmed, right? So that sort of translation work is funded as well. And then national security or national prominence are two things that get funded as well, right? We want to send a human to Mars because there's a lot of science to be gained, but also America, the US, wants to be the first one to do it, right? Just like the moon. Unless you believe the moon was just all made up in a studio. It's a big controversy. So national security, the DoD gives a lot of money out as well to fund research that can help the military perform better in a lot of different ways. So these are some of the reasons people give money. When you think about your research and your ideas, think about your motivations, think about where the overlap's going to be between what you want to do, what the funder wants to do. When those two things align, that's when you've got a good situation to maybe get some money to support your work. So when you've got some funders identified that might be a good fit, do some research on them to learn more. Look at their annual reports. National Science Foundation, National Institutes for Health, the National Endowment for the Humanities all have webinars, and they also will travel around the country and do workshops face-to-face. I went to one in Florida a couple years ago that the National Science Foundation held. Program officers from the NSF came. They talked to us about what they've been up to, what sort of changes were coming to the regulations, and how their priorities were going to shift for the future. It's a great chance to get some face time with people that make funding decisions. And we'd all like to think that funding's all about merit and the best science wins out or the best research wins out and gets the money. But a lot of times it's about your network as well. Again, getting to know people and making sure that they know you can go a long way. So a lot of organizations also have strategic plans. I was recently looking at the Meadows Foundation. They're based up in northern Texas. They've got a strategic plan that outlines everything that they want to do for the next 5 years and how they plan to achieve it. So you can take a look at those and see if your research will help them achieve their goals. They might give you money to do that work, and it will help them accomplish what they say they're going to accomplish. Networking and the IRS Form 990 we've talked about. Any questions? All right. So you've got an idea, you've got some ideas of who might fund that work. Then you find either specific calls for proposals in specific areas. One example might be National Science Foundation has the Major Research Instrument Program. They give up to, I think, $4 million for researchers to buy a piece of laboratory equipment that will allow them to do some science. So that call is really specifically to buy equipment. You can't put labor on it or student salaries, lab supplies. It's for the purchase and installation of a piece of equipment. That's what its goal is. But then there's also, there are directorates in computer science that have broad area announcements, and that's any research in computer science. Any researcher can apply and say, here's my work in computer science, here's what I want to do. They'll convene a panel of experts and they'll get together and look at a bunch of proposals and pick some that they're going to fund. So there are a couple of different ways to go about it. That's more on the federal level. And it varies with foundations. Some foundations are super specific about what they want to do. Others are more general and open the door to more opportunities or more diverse set of proposals under a given mechanism. So once you've found a funder, it's really important to think about whether you're eligible. The call for proposals is going to say who they'll give money to. A lot of the proposals that we get at this institution are for the institution. You might be the PI, the principal investigator, who writes the proposal and is going to do all the work, but the money comes to Texas A&M Corpus Christi. Okay? With foundations, it may be more likely that the money comes to a specific investigator who's going to do the work. It'll still get routed most of the time through our research office, and they'll help you handle all the paperwork and processing and legal and tax implications and all that stuff. But it's really important to know who's eligible. Some funding opportunities are open for grad students and some are not. So that's really important from your perspective. Will this be, is this usable by grad students? A lot of times for grad students, you work with an advisor. Your advisor might be the principal investigator, and you might help write the proposal, help do the work once it's funded, be on the publications and conference presentations that come out of it. So you may play a really key role, but a more established researcher is going to be the name that's sort of associated with being sort of the first author a lot of times. It just depends on who you work with and what your discipline is. It really can vary across fields. So eligibility is one of them. Deadline, and just to come back to eligibility, once you've written that proposal, it takes you 6 months for federal agencies to get back to you and let you know if you've won the award. So if you've only got 9 months left until you graduate, don't write a proposal for somebody, unless they're going to hire you on as a postdoc. Now, it could still be valuable experience to work on a proposal, so I wouldn't discourage you, but just be realistic about when you're going to hear. In terms of deadline, really think about how much time you've got to put a proposal together that's going to be competitive. A lot of, like National Endowment for the Humanities, the fellowship has a 7% success rate, which is super low. And there are some out there for NOAA and DoD that are like 2% success rates. There are other programs that can be 20 to 40% success rate. A lot of agencies, federal agencies, will post the success rates. I'm not sure. Foundations, it varies. Some do, some don't. So think about the deadline, and do you have time to write a competitive proposal? If you spend the next week hurrying to rush together a proposal that's not very competitive, then you've just wasted a ton of energy for something that's probably not going to get funded. Maybe you can reuse some of that for the next deadline that might be in 6 months or a year, right? But think strategically about quality, timelines, and if you can bring everything together to make it happen. Some funders require matching funds. Matching funds can be really hard to get on this campus from my experience. Sometimes departments or colleges will have some funds available to match, but it's pretty rare. So that's another thing to watch out for. And then we talked about competitiveness, funding rates. If it's only a 2% funding rate, it's very competitive. It's going to be hard for you to win, so you should really plan ahead and put your best foot forward. And I had an example. We were going to look at the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program. Most of the campus's money comes from the NSF. They're our biggest federal funder. And their proposals are really clearly laid out and will tell you who's eligible, what the deadline is, how much money you can ask for. One other thing that's not on here are limited submissions. Some funding opportunities only allow 1 or fewer than 5 proposals from a certain institution. If you ever find a proposal or an opportunity like that you want to write a proposal to, be sure to let your mentor or your department chair and the research office know, because our procedure when it's a limited submission is to ask the whole campus if anyone wants to apply. And then we have the people who want to apply all write short proposals and compete to be the ones that we select to go forward. Okay? It's a little bit of minutia there that you probably won't run into, but something that's good to know. So I've alluded a little bit to the process. Once you win a grant, and this is not coming through very well, but let's say you win the award here, then you have to actually do the work you said you were going to do, right? So when you're writing a proposal, make sure you can follow through and complete the work. That's really the message behind this slide. But you do the work, you file quarterly or semi-annually or annual reports to the funder, and then when the grant is done, you close it out and finalize all your paperwork, and then the project's finished. So there is a process. This is just a graphic about the Office of Research Compliance. Institutional Review Board is the one people are most familiar with. Research with human subjects requires certain processes be followed. Any questions about these things? I just wanted to touch on them briefly so to make sure you're aware. You probably had IRB training somewhere else at another time. Here's another link. I was going to take you to 10 simple rules for getting grants from PLOS 1, or just PLOS, Computational Biology. It offers a good top 10. So when it comes to grant writing as well, 3 months from now when you've forgotten everything I tell you today and everything you learn in part 2 of this presentation series, you can go to these sources online and get some tips, right? Or you can watch the video. Get a plug-in for that video. So coming back to the one-page executive summary, this really ties back in more directly to grant writing. These are some things you should do. Writing helps you to think and forces you to be specific, helps you state why your idea matters. Think about the funder's priorities, be responsive, and develop a list of keywords that will help people like me search for funding opportunities that you can then write proposals to. The one thing the research office does not do on this campus is write proposals, because if we did, that's all that we would do. How great would it be if someone wrote proposals for you, right? I could have 10 proposal ideas by tomorrow that people could work on for me. So we don't have the resources to offer that service. But to come back to the one-pager after that little recap, sort of a general structure for it. Think about setting up an overview and then defining your problem or your need or rationale or the significance of your work. It's really important to think about the perspectives of the reviewer. If you're an NSF reviewer or any federal agency reviewer and you're reviewing for a program, you get sent, let's say 20 to 30, maybe 15 to 20 proposals that you're supposed to review, right? And then you have a meeting in Washington, D.C. you're going to fly to. Now, maybe you don't really get to those proposals until you're on the airplane. Hopefully they're looking at them sooner. But these people are all really busy. They're faculty members or professionals working, and they're also volunteering to review for these federal agencies. They want to know right up front what your problem is and why it matters. So make sure you put that in the first paragraph of your one-page, your short proposal summary. Okay, that's the most basic, important thing that you should know. Tell me why it matters right up front. And not why it matters to your fellow experts, but why it matters to the world. Okay? So a brief definition or statement of what the gap in knowledge is, and then what you're going to do, or why you think you might be able to solve that problem, and then how that problem applies more broadly. Okay? Especially for bench scientists, or for people that are focusing on super esoteric knowledge creation that is a few steps removed from application. Okay? It's really important, I think, that you, as best as you can, sort of extrapolate to the application stage. Then you should describe the work in a little bit of detail. You've only got a page, so you really need to be careful with your words. Talk about your methods, any results or hypotheses that you have about what the outcome might be. Mention your work plan a little bit so we know sort of the timeline. Is it going to take you 6 months, 18 months, 3 years? What are you looking for in terms of time? And you can mention money in this part if you need to. It sort of depends on the funder. And if you're looking at a specific funding mechanism, or if you're just doing it like an open solicitation. People write these one-pagers and we'll send them to program officers and say, hey, can we do a phone call and talk about this? And then they'll get on the phone and then get more specific about where specifically to apply for money. So sometimes this is just a conversation starter. And then evaluation. It's really important that if you say you're going to do something to a funder, that you evaluate whether or not you did it at the back end, right? So think about that as well. How are you going to know if you were successful? It's a lot to fit in a page, but usually that page is single-spaced, if that helps at all. And it can be done. And I actually tell people to write a page and a quarter to a page and a half, because I feel like if they send it to me, I can cut at least 8 or 10 lines out of most people's writing pretty easily. So it's really important to share your summary with a mentor, a colleague, a research development officer, or someone from another discipline. People from other disciplines are super valuable, especially educated people from other disciplines, because they should be able to understand what it is you're trying to do and accomplish and how you're going to use that money from just reading through that one pager. And if they can't, they'll flag sentences or words and be like, what does this mean? Or I sort of get this, but it's not really clear. It's priceless, and you should definitely try to do it when you can. Common mistakes. Any questions so far? We talk about mistakes. Biggest one that I see on a day-to-day basis, because researchers get super focused on their specialty. They're looking at this mouse DNA in the laboratory, and then they're going to zap it with some microwaves, or they're going to do something crazy to this muscle tissue and evaluate the effect of heat on it. And that's amazing, really cool work, but why does it matter? What is it going to lead to, right? Understanding stress on muscle might help us devise better ways to help people's muscles heal after it's been traumatized, or looking at mouse DNA after it's been electrocuted might help us deal with, I don't know, something dealing with electricity like lightning. Anyway, tell us why it matters, right? All your work matters. Just you don't always think about why it matters to lay people. That's where I think that having your grandmother read your stuff sometimes is useful, because she should be able to tell you why it matters, right? Sometimes people respond to the wrong problem. So that example I gave you about the National Science Foundation having a funding mechanism to buy equipment or instruments, you shouldn't write to them and ask for money to hire an army of grad students to do some really cool work. That's not what that funding mechanism is about, right? That's not the problem they're trying to solve. So be really conscious of what it is that the funder wants and write to that need. It's also true that you should stay true to like your research goals and your research agenda and your career aspirations, but sometimes you have to sort of wiggle things a little bit to make them fit. You shouldn't do that too much, because then it's going to look like you just are a bad fit for this funding mechanism, and that's going to put you at a disadvantage when it comes to terms of being awarded as well. But there's always a little compromise. Maybe not always, but almost always. Remember that you can't solve everything. A lot of times funding is going to pay for one very specific narrow piece of your discipline to be studied and solved, or have progress made in that area. So don't claim that you're going to fix all the ills of your discipline. Stay focused on what it is that you think you can do, and that's where the evaluation piece really helps. If you can't measure it on the back end to show if you've been successful, then it's probably not something that you can achieve with the project that you set out, right? Think about risk as well. A lot of advice junior faculty and grad students, postdocs get is that you should find a collaborator, like a mentor or a more senior researcher in your field who's got a track record of winning money from federal agencies, if that's where you're going to go. Federal agencies really like to see a track record, especially if you're going to start asking for $500,000, million, $2 million. They're not going to give it to someone with no experience, right? Because they don't have the trust. It's too risky. They're not sure you can follow through and get the job done. So when you're a starting out researcher, your first grants are going to be, $10,000, $50,000, fairly small money. And then as you progress, and maybe you're a team member on a larger proposal that's worth a lot more, you gain that experience. Your CV shows that you've had experience and a track record of dealing with larger sums of money, handling it appropriately, and producing results, then you'll be more likely to win larger sums of money. Multi-year projects will be funded by federal agencies. So keep that in mind. That's part of risk. I think another part of risk is often researchers work on issues that are sort of hot button issues that may be out there. I think a few years ago there was the vaccine and autism connection. A lot of people weren't sure if the science on that was settled. I think there are a lot of foundations that might have been tentative about trying to fund one of those, a research project in that area, because they would be worried about maybe getting some bad publicity, right? Bad press. So that's another risk factor to think about. I think now most of the science community thinks that that is settled, but there are other issues as well. We're in the Me Too era. Some funders may not want to engage in research related to those issues, which is unfortunate. But it just speaks to their willingness to take risk in certain areas, right? Some foundations in particular get money from very conservative donors that might not want to support issues, research in issues of abortion or other hot button issues that are still really being talked about in our society, right? So be conscious of those things. If you're working in one of those areas, it just means some funders may not be available to you, but others will be because of the work you're doing. There's money out there for everything, so don't get discouraged just because one foundation may not want to support the work that you're after. And even the federal government, we'd like to think that the federal government would sort of just support all valuable research across the board, but that's not true either. Their priorities are set by Congress. The president used to have an Office of Science and Technology Policy. I think that Trump disbanded it. It may still be out there, I'm not sure. But federal legislators set the tone for the federal agencies that give money to researchers. So risk is important to consider. Measurement, as I talked about, is really important. You're going to need to evaluate your project on the back end. So each field has its own methods and its own means of measuring what it is that you did and what the output was. So think about that as well. And then make sure you're equipped to pursue these projects. Like I said, a grad student's not going to probably get funding for a 5-year, $5 million project. It's going to be something a little smaller. If you need equipment to do the project, make sure that the funder will let you buy that equipment with the money that they will give you. Otherwise, they might give you the money to do a project, and you'll be like, well, I don't have the equipment to do the project, so now I can't accept the money. It's really an awkward position to be in. So just make sure that you're ready. And I think that really, all these sort of speak to the role of a good mentor in your field. The research office and grant writers can help you develop good proposals and work on those skills. But experts in your field are the ones that really know the landscape, how things operate, where the money comes from, what sort of things you can do and with what you can't really get away with in your specific discipline. So keep that in mind. So in grant writing, it's common to focus on the problems, trends in your field, where are the research gaps that need to be filled or answered, hindrances to the field's progress. Like we want to know about those neutrinos, right? What's going on with the neutrino? Do we think we captured one or something? We measured one a while ago. Have they found a second one yet? They probably have. I haven't kept up with astronomy or whatever field that's in. But where are the gaps or opportunities? And what sort of work needs continued support? Keep in mind that TAMU CC is a Hispanic serving institution. There are funds targeted toward Hispanic serving institutions, and we're a minority serving institution as well. That opens up a few other opportunities for researchers and grad students and postdocs on our campus, so keep that in mind. A big initiative that's been ongoing for quite some time is to encourage women and minorities to enroll and stay in STEM fields, and there's still funding out there to support that. So there are other fields as well where we need more participation, so at least that's the general policy direction from Washington, D.C. There's also asset-based community development is a thing in the grant writing and community development world. It's instead of talking about, as in this previous slide, the problems, like we've got these problems, these poor people need food from the food bank, our students don't have any money, so we need some more cash. Those are real problems, and they do need to be addressed. But also think about the assets. What are you positioned to do as faculty from an institutional perspective? There's research happening in Corpus Christi because we've got a city that's 2/3 Hispanic and the rest of the country is becoming more Hispanic every day, right? So we've got a unique situation here where we can really look at a demographic difference within our community that isn't quite mirroring the rest of the country yet, but we're sort of headed that way. What can we learn from our position here, and can we use that sort of positionality to attract funding? So geography, your background as a researcher, what is it that you bring to the table? We all have our own experiences, knowledge, and ways of looking at the world, and don't discount that, okay? What are you passionate about? And in terms of your career, what do you want to build towards? So if you want to run a research center someday and bring in $3 million a year on average for like 20 years of your career when you're super productive and at your peak, how do you get there, right? Talk to your mentors. You can come talk to me if you want. But you start small and you build up in steps, bigger and bigger, until you get the faculty position, you get the $20 million grant, and you start your center. Sounds easy, right? No, it's not. But some people have that goal. Other people aren't necessarily focused on having a large research center with an army of grad students and faculty working for you. Some people want to maybe start a counseling center in the community where they can make a difference with a certain demographic. Something like that. You'll never probably need $20 million, even though it would probably make a huge difference. But smaller grants might be all that you need to do the work that it is that you want to do. So a lot of this is really about career planning and thinking about your long-term strategy and where it is you want to go. And then sort of the specific grant writing is about getting your ideas out there. So a lot of times people think when they're going to come to a grant writing session, they're not going to have to hear about career planning, but it's really, really important. So also think about alignment. I think that there are some people that consciously think about grad school and they think about what's trendy and what's going to be trendy when they finish their PhD or their master's degree and how that's going to flip into a faculty position or a career. Other people, I think, really pursue just whatever interests them and whatever they get passionate about. I think both approaches can work. Some people do a mix of both those things, I think. But think about what it is you want to do and how that aligns with funding priorities of agencies, the federal government, nonprofits, society. And I've been talking really specifically about the US today, but some people will want to go do international work, So think about that. Like, I would love to go work in Thailand for 5 years. So if I were going to do that connected to my research, I would start thinking about what I could do in Thailand connected to my research and build toward that, right? That'd be great fun. I'd have to get better at riding a motorcycle in crowded city traffic. Having been to Bangkok, that's all I can say. But it's a great place. So yeah, know your agency, who serves on their boards, when they tend to do things. A lot of times, agencies will have the same call for proposals every year. It'll come out in the same month. The major research instrument proposal is due in late January every year, so we can count on that. So keep track of their timelines. And then think about where they're based and how they engage. Like I said, the Meadows Foundation's in North Texas, National Science Foundation, NIH, are in DC. NIH is also, well, there's the CDC near Atlanta as well. So just be aware of all these things. It's really important. And the research office gives out, this last year was our first year, we gave out student research awards of $800. Abe won one. And I think we gave out 8 total. We'll have the same competition in the spring. We'll send out an email probably in February announcing the competition. Proposals will be due in early April. We'll announce winners in May or late April, and then you'll be able to use the money starting September 1st of 2019. Okay? The reason for that is that it's our fiscal year. We run September 1 of a year until August 31st of the next year. So what we'll do is we'll hold the competition, then we'll have the money for the following fiscal year, and you can spend it on research. We've got a link here, and there's a link in the handout that's going to be, or the list that's going to be emailed to all of you. And you've got my business card. Graduate Studies also, I think, has some research funds, but I didn't have time to provide a link. Michelle, do you want to add anything about, off the top of your head, to put you on the spot?
Wait. I'm Michelle Costa. I work for the College of Graduate Studies here, also across from Starbucks. And you can stop by my office and talk to anybody there, and we can let you know what funds are available at that time.
Yeah. So there are resources on campus you can apply to support your work. We'd like to see more of those available, and hopefully we'll grow that fund in the future. There's also specific colleges have opportunities as well. The College of Science and Engineering is part of the acronym is LSAMP, LSAMP. It's the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation in Science, I think. And that gives scholarships, I believe, to students who fit certain demographic categories. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But you should all be aware through your department and your college of what's going on at the college level. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about funding opportunities. In summary, it really is all about the preparation, and you should be going to conferences. You don't know, I mean, people say you should publish in grad school. It's nice if you can get one out, depending on your field. Some fields people publish a lot, others people don't. So if appropriate, but do all those things that people do when they're in your program, right? Even if you're an introvert, go to that conference and walk up to somebody new and say hi. Keep track of the funders in your field and know what they're up to, and you can usually apply or subscribe to get like newsletters or email updates from them. And you can keep tabs on them. Go to grant writing training like you've done today, and keep track of what's going on locally too. The most important thing is to start early and ask for help. We all want to see you succeed and graduate and be successful, so let us know what we can do. Any questions or comments? I think that was the last slide. Yep, there's my contact information. So.
Did everybody here sign in? Oh, just so you have all the.
Yeah, thanks.